All over Europe and America, there are demonstrations for the freedom of the Palestinians. Jews are called oppressors and tyrants. I look at myself in the mirror. I don't seem like a tyrant. But how do I explain it to an activist for this Palestinian freedom? I wonder, why are there so many people who have dedicated themselves to the fight for freedom who are taking the side of the terrorists today? And then, shouldn't we all strive for freedom? So if that's the case, then where did they all go wrong? The modern freedom movement has begun with very noble intentions. Well, everyone wants to be free. The problem, however, is that freedom is a zero-sum game. One party's gain necessarily means another's loss. My freedom to make noise robs you of your freedom to be in quiet. My freedom to sit in this chair whenever I want takes away your freedom to sit in it whenever I occupy it. My freedom from slavery nullifies your freedom to own a slave, and so on. Philosophers like Thomas Hobbes have written that it is impossible to find even a single case where someone's freedom would not infringe on someone else's freedom. Isiah Berlin explained that a positive freedom of one person will always take away a negative freedom of another. It turns out that by fighting for someone's freedom, we are always, at the same time, are fighting against someone else's freedom. This means that we can never be simply for freedom. We must always weigh one freedom against another. We must always choose whose freedom we are fighting for. And most importantly, whose freedom we are willing to do it at expense of. The founders of liberalism answered this question unequivocally. John Locke and Adam Smith had only one idea in mind. They fought for the freedom of an individual at the expense of the freedom of the government. They tried to give more rights to a person by limiting the rights of the state. They didn't even think for fighting for the freedom of one individual at the expense of the freedom of another individual. Only in later generations did the activists for freedom begin to arbitrarily choose which freedoms they advocate for without even thinking about the question of at whose expense would it be. But here is the worst part. There is not a single system of beliefs that could not be presented as a fight for someone's freedom. This is why the most monstrous ideologies of our history have always claimed to be fighting for someone's freedom. The Nazis fought for the freedom of Germany from the Jews and Jewish influence. Now we understand why there are so many of today's activists for freedom who advocate for the freedom of so-called Palestinians. Because in modern society, they teach us to fight for freedom, but they don't teach us to ask, at the cost of whose freedom will this be? Well, I can fight for the freedom of Arabs to kill whoever they want. Well, I'm fighting for freedom. And the fact that this will be at the expense of a Jew to have a freedom to live is not even mentioned. The first book known to modern world that has spoken about individual freedom is the 5 books of Moses. The Jews wanted to free themselves from Egyptian slavery. Moses said to Pharaoh, "Let my people go so they may serve God." The Torah says specifically Number one, why the Jews needed the freedom, what freedom is required for them, and number two, at expense of whom will this freedom be achieved. Therefore, when someone talks to you about freedom, ask specifically, what kind of freedom are you seeking? And most importantly, at whose expense will you do it?